recording. Okay. Amanda DeAmico. Amanda is a 2009 proud pioneer. So welcome back. And then Nick, you need to show Amanda the new building after this, if you have time. Yeah. Okay, so currently serves as a project manager in MSA's Roundabout Design Group. She has more than 14 years of experience focusing on solving intersection capacity and safety deficiencies with modern roundabouts. We have a group of city designs working on intersection safety concerns. So one of the options is roundabout. You don't have to go to roundabout, it's just one of the options, right? So
pick a roundabout.
You have to justify it, okay? And then she specializes in roundabout design and implementation, ranging from initial intersection feasibility study, safety analysis, and then public involvement, final plan, specification, estimates, all those things. Amanda is also a peer reviewer and mentor on roundabout designs and plans, and has taught classes on roundabout operation analysis and design. She has had the privilege of collaborating with some of the nation's leading roundabout designers, and has worked on hundreds of roundabout projects across the US. So, well, please help me welcome our speaker.
All right, thank you, Danny, and thank you all for being here tonight. I'm really excited to be back from Platteville. As you mentioned, I graduated in 2009, so it's been a while, and there's a lot of new developments happening over here. Hi, Dr. Sam. It's good to see you. Lots of new faces here too, so it's really great to be here. So I actually started my roundabout journey when I was at Platteville. I worked 2 summers for a small engineering firm in Madison whose sole job was to look at roundabouts. And we worked on roundabout projects across the country. And I worked with some of the best roundabout engineers we have here in the US. So it was really exciting, and I'm really passionate about roundabouts. And what's funny is that when I started, I really didn't know much about roundabouts at all. At that time, if they weren't as common, I don't think I'd even seen one before. So I've learned a lot along the way, and I'm excited to share some things with you today. There we go. Might just take a while. All right, so I thought I'd just share just a little bit about MSA first. So we're a full service engineering firm, civil and environmental engineers. And these are all of the, you guys. So how's that? Okay. So these are all of the, or just some of the disciplines that we have at MSA. What's exciting about this is that even though I work on roadway projects involve a lot of other disciplines as well. So there's a lot of collaboration with our stormwater engineers, our environmental engineers, our electrical engineers. There's a lot of different people across the company that we're able to leverage on all of our roadway projects. We have 17 offices across the 4 states here in this immediate area, and we're proudly 100% employee owned. So today what I want to talk about is a little bit about intersection safety, a bit of a background on intersection safety in general, and then touch on what a modern roundabout is and the safety models that we use to analyze roundabouts. A little bit of a history lesson in there too with the modern roundabouts. And then how we apply those safety models. And there's 2 main ways that we apply the safety models that we use for roundabouts. One is the intersection control evaluation, and then also using them for network screening to review roundabouts that are already in operation and see how well they're performing. Then I have a case study that we can take a look at for an intersection that's a roundabout intersection that needed a little bit of help. So first we'll talk about intersection safety. And I want to start out just by taking a national look at intersection safety. So FHWA, which is the Federal Highways Administration, they have a program that is their focused approach to safety. And their goal for this program is to identify where all the fatalities are across the nation and how we can target them and improve them. So they identified 4 different areas that encompassed almost 90% of the traffic fatalities across the US. And those focus areas are roadway departure crashes, intersection only crashes, pedestrian crashes, and bicycle crashes. And roundabouts can really help target 3 of those 4 categories, the intersection crashes and the pedestrian and bicycle crashes. So that's what we're looking at trying to improve our infrastructure to address fatalities across the nation. A few more national statistics here. We have intersection-related crashes. So about 50% of the crashes that we experience across the nation, this is from 2016 to 2020, are fatal and injury crashes occurring at intersections. And about just under 50% of all crashes that happen in the US are intersection-related. So being able to improve our intersections is a great way to reduce those fatal crashes. Taking a brief look at traffic signals, on average, over 10,000 people are killed or injured at traffic signals each year. And there was a AAA report that was completed relatively recently that analyzed red light running at traffic signals in particular. And in 2017, they identified 939 people that were killed across the nation just related to red light running. So you can see that that's one of the major issues with a traffic signal and why we look to try to install roundabouts when we can. The AAA is highly supportive of roundabouts because of their proven safety. So taking a look at how roundabouts are able to reduce crashes across the US. In 2001, there was a study by the IIHS, and it's one of the original crash reduction studies for roundabouts that occurred within the nation. And that study identified that crashes overall were decreased about 39% when an intersection that was previously stop controlled or traffic signal controlled was replaced as a roundabout. And similarly, fatal crashes reduced 90% at intersections that were converted to roundabouts. So that's really impressive results there that they were seeing from roundabouts at that time. And that's really what led the push to install roundabouts across our communities today. Wisconsin is a national leader in roundabout installation. If you spent any time driving around Wisconsin, you've probably run in, I see some heads nodding, you probably run into roundabouts. Especially in the Green Bay area. I was driving around there not that long ago, and I felt like everywhere I was going through a roundabout, and that was really exciting to me. So we've been studying our roundabouts for a long time in Wisconsin, and a recent study that we were looking at as far as a reduction of crashes, KADC crashes, so that's your fatal and your injury crashes. ADC are just the different severities of those injury crashes. So the roundabouts in Wisconsin have, of the 54 sites that were studied in this table that I have on the screen here, overall crashes reduced by 31%. When you look at a single lane roundabout itself, those were reduced by 85%. So we are seeing similar results as to what that national study in 2001 was reporting, and roundabouts continue to reduce those crashes. So why are roundabouts so much better? What makes a roundabout better? It reduces crashes, reduces the injury severity. Well, a lot of that you can tell just by looking at the conflict diagram. So here we have a conflict diagram for a traditional intersection, you could say a signalized intersection, and a conflict diagram for a roundabout. So a traditional signalized intersection, just single lanes approaching from all directions, that's going to have a total of 32 conflict points. Whereas a roundabout has a total of 8 conflict points. So just reducing the number of conflict points, and the conflict points are just locations where all of your traffic movements cross, so like a left turn conflicting with a through movement or something like that. That's how you get all those points. And that's one reason why roundabouts do such a good job of reducing the number of crashes at an intersection is because less conflict points. One thing you might notice from this diagram too is that for the conventional intersection, there are a bunch of red dots in the middle of the intersection. But you don't see any red dots for the roundabout. And those red dots are the crossing conflict points. Those are your T-bone crashes, your most severe angle crashes. And those are the ones that cause a lot of the fatalities and the injuries that we see at signalized intersections. And roundabouts, because they have a yield sign and the geometry of the roundabout, as the drivers come in more at the side swipe type of conflict, that's why the severity of crashes at roundabouts is a lot less. So some of the benefits of roundabouts, they are the safest type of at-grade intersection. I mentioned the side swipe crashes, the angle of conflict when you're entering the traffic that's circulating and the traffic that's entering is a side swipe that's less severe. You have a little slower speed at roundabouts, just the physical geometry of a roundabout, the splitter island or median as you're approaching the intersection and the central island in the middle that directs drivers and forces them into certain patterns, and it requires them to slow down in order to negotiate those curves. You also have simplified decision-making at a roundabout. So when you come up to the entry, all you need to do is look to the left to determine whether or not it is safe to enter the intersection. And that's in converse to a lot of other types of intersections where you need to look across the intersection and to your right, make sure that nobody else is coming. All you need to do at a roundabout is look to your left. They have very high capacity, often very similar to traffic signal intersections. Sometimes even more capacity than traffic signals in some situations. They're also suitable for areas where you have a lot of high traffic or low traffic, especially intersections that have fluctuating flows. So say like next to a school, where you have really high peak periods in the morning when all the kids are coming to school, and then in the afternoon when all the kids are getting out of school. A roundabout can do a really good job of accommodating those high flows during those peak times. But then in the middle of the day, when nobody else is going through that intersection, you don't have to stop at a red light either. So it does a good job of handling the flows as they fluctuate throughout the day. Roundabouts are also great as an aesthetic feature. A lot of communities like to put some landscaping in the middle, use it as a gateway to their community, and just make everything look pretty. All right, so a little bit about what a modern roundabout is and what it isn't, and a history lesson. So isn't a roundabout just another traffic circle? Well, as I listen to my Google Maps telling me how to get here today, even though I know how, I just have it on just in case. I go through a roundabout and it says, as you approach the traffic circle, take the second exit. No, it's not a traffic circle, it's a roundabout. So I'd like for you to all know that a roundabout is a type of circular intersection, but a roundabout is not a traffic circle. So we have other types of circular intersections. You may have heard of traffic circles or rotaries, or neighborhood traffic circles. We'll talk a little bit more about traffic circles and rotaries in the next few slides. A neighborhood traffic circle, you might have seen in a residential community where they just pop a circle in the middle of one of the intersections around it, but it doesn't have a lot of the features of a map. So traffic circles. Traffic circles are large. They were often developed as a civic feature, something to have in the central island to represent the community and attract people into the central island and take a look at what's going on in there. It's really a ring of a series of intersections, a circle with a bunch of intersections around it. And when you enter the circle, you're facing the central island perpendicular to the circle. It's basically a right angle, and then you wait for a gap in order to enter. The series of intersections that are around that circle, they might be yield controlled, they might be stop controlled, they might be varies depending on location. But these have been around for a really long time. So I have two examples on the screen here. The Columbus Circle is from Central Park in New York City. The configuration that it's in right now was introduced in 1904. The concept for it was actually even older than that. And then there's an example from Bath, England from the 1700s. So these have been around for a long time, and we've progressed since then. So in the early 1900s, the US didn't have yield signs. That wasn't invented yet. So when you came up to an uncontrolled intersection, it was first in. So whoever gets there first is the one that wins, and the other people then just have to wait for that. And you can imagine that that would get pretty chaotic pretty quickly. So shortly after that, they introduced the yield to right law. And this is something that you probably encountered in driver's ed, where if you come up to an intersection at the same time as somebody else, you yield to the person that's on your right. Okay, well, that makes sense. But in a situation where you don't have a traffic control and you have a signal or a roundabout like this or a traffic circle like this, if you both come up to that intersection within the traffic circle at the same time, the people in the circulatory roadway would stop and yield to the person on their right. So that means that the entering driver's got priority, and then all of a sudden you get a lockup at your intersection. So you can get in, but you can't get out. So that didn't last very long either. In the 1930s and the 50s, the US developed and implemented what they call the rotary. So the rotary is where you, instead of having those right angles where you enter the intersection, now you're merging into the intersection. And you're merging into the intersection at speed. So some of these could be 35, 40, 50 miles an hour. And the way that the capacity for these was determined was based on how long your weaving section was. So the distance from where you enter to where you exit would identify the capacity of that intersection. Well, if you needed a lot of capacity, you needed that length to be really long. So then you needed to make the circle to be bigger so that you could separate out those entries and exits. And this just led to really large layouts. And when you're in the middle of the circle, if they have two lanes, the very inside lane, you can't get out. You have to make a lane change in order to get out. So you have a lot of high speeds, you have a lot of weaving going in and out at these types of intersections, and that led to a mess too. So the last reference that we have to rotaries in our design guidelines was in 1965. And then by the mid 1990s, most of these rotaries were removed and they were replaced with modern roundabouts. So here you can see the size comparison between what a modern roundabout would look like at this intersection. All right, so by 1939, there was a police officer in Tulsa, Oklahoma, police officer Clinton Riggs. And he was getting tired of writing tickets to people that were just almost stopping at an intersection, but not quite stopping. And he thought, well, maybe we need to tell these people to yield. So he invented the first yield sign. And he installed this yield sign in 1950 at an intersection in Tulsa that was having problems. And his problems went away. It made it so much better with installing this yield sign. And it wasn't long after that that the MODIFICATION adopted the yield sign as a standard method of traffic control. METCC, Manual on Uniform Traffic Control, there's the acronym. And then it was also adopted in the UK, and the UK started installing yield signs at their roundabouts. And they realized that their congestion went away. So all the lockups from traffic signal or from traffic circles and rotaries went away once they introduced the yield control at their roundabouts. And they saw increased capacity, reduced delays for the drivers, and injuries were reduced by almost 40%. So this is really what led the way to modern roundabouts, is the invention of the yield sign. So let's take a look at what a modern roundabout is, now that we know what it's not. And I think you know most of these things already, but we'll go through it anyway. So a modern roundabout is a compact circular intersection. Traffic goes counterclockwise around the central island. Entering traffic yields. The approaches are channelized in order to deflect traffic and go on a prescribed path. This is what leads to our speed control of the roundabout, is this deflection, requiring the drivers to maneuver around the splitter islands and the central island. And they're simple for drivers. They're simple for pedestrians. Like I said earlier, for drivers, you're only looking to the left to decide whether or not it's safe to enter the intersection. For pedestrians, with the use of the splitter island in the middle, you can cross each leg of the splitter island in 2 separate stages. Modern roundabouts are generally low maintenance. Now, if you have some landscaping in the middle, that might change a little bit, but you don't have the maintenance associated with traffic signal lights. And these are really the safest types of intersections, especially when you're looking at high-speed intersections. Modern roundabouts can be installed in all types of locations, and they can have all different types of sizes and configurations. Here's just a few examples of some of the different types of roundabouts that you might encounter. You might encounter a corridor roundabouts or roundabouts at an interchange, which is the one at the top of the screen there. You might encounter roundabouts in rural locations, urban locations, single lane, multi-lane. We have compact roundabouts, which is the picture on the right of the screen. You have intersections that are closely spaced or have a lot of legs or look really confusing and chaotic, and they can all come together and be some peanut about or octopus or whatever you want to call it. You can even have roundabouts in areas where you have transit or light rail. The picture at the bottom of the screen is in Phoenix, Arizona, and this is one where there's light rail that goes through the middle of the roundabout. So they really have a lot of applications. But now that we know a little bit more about roundabouts, I'd like to talk about the safety models. That's what I want to focus on for the rest of this presentation here. And there's two main safety models that we look at. We look at crash modification factors and we look at safety performance functions. So first, if we look at crash modification factors, a crash modification factor is an estimate in the change of crashes associated with applying a safety treatment or a countermeasure. Have any of you used crash modification factors before? Next class. All right, excellent. Well, this is a little preview of that done. So if you have, let's just say an intersection and you want to change something about that to make it more safe, that would be a countermeasure, and you can study places that have across the country that have done this, and you look at before and after crashes and identify the amount of reduction in crashes that you would anticipate by installing that type of countermeasure. So if your crash modification factor is less than 1, then that means that your countermeasure or your treatment has the potential to reduce the number of crashes at your intersection. And if your countermeasure or if your crash modification factor is greater than 1, then that means that your countermeasure has the potential to increase crashes at that particular location. And if you do 1 minus that, then you can understand the percent reduction in crashes. So I have an example here. There's a website, the CMF Clearinghouse, that has a compilation of all different CMFs for different types of countermeasures or treatments that you might want to apply. So here I've grabbed CMFs for converting an intersection from a two-way stop control to a modern roundabout. So that's the one at the top. And then also converting that two-way stop controlled intersection into a traffic signal for a rural area. And you can see this value here. This is your crash modification factor. So to convert your intersection from stop controlled to a roundabout, your CMF is 0.29. And if you do 1 minus that, then that tells you that your percent reduction in all crashes that you can expect by applying this countermeasure would be a 71% reduction. If you look at a traffic signal for this particular scenario, the CMF is 0.56. And so you would expect a percent reduction in the number of crashes by 44%. So if you're just doing a high level review of different types of intersection controls, you can look at your crash modification factors and say, okay, yeah, I think that it's going to reduce the number of crashes at my intersection by such and such percent. But if you have a little bit more information about your intersection, you can get some more numbers out of it. So let's say you have your intersection and you know the crash history for that intersection. So for the past 5 years, that intersection has experienced 10.4 crashes per year. You can apply your CMFs to that 10.4 crashes per year and understand how many crashes you would estimate to have at that intersection after you've installed a roundabout or after you've installed a traffic signal. So 10.4 crashes times your CMF for converting to a roundabout of 0.29, that gets you 3 crashes per year estimated for a roundabout. Or if you estimate for the traffic signal, you would have 5.8 crashes. So this is a simple way that we can look at intersections and identify the reduction in crashes anticipated with that. And this is the methodology that we had for a long time. And then more recently, we have developed a more sophisticated model. And that more sophisticated model is the safety performance function. And what a safety performance function is it's an equation that helps you predict the average number of crashes per year at your site based on your site's characteristics. We have SPFs for roadway segments, and we have SPFs for intersections. And the most recent addition to SPFs are for roundabouts. So that happened within the last 5 years or so. And this is a national study. The CMFs also are all national studies. And we have CMFs that we can use to help predict the number of fatal crashes, the number of injury crashes, and the number of property damage only crashes. And I've included the base equation for a safety performance function here. And there's several different variables in here, but what I'll draw your attention to is AADT is a variable. So AADT is your average annual daily traffic that's entering the intersection. And that would make sense that the number of crashes at your intersection is going to be related to how much traffic you have at the intersection. And then the other variable that I want to draw your attention to is all the X's there at the end. Yeah,
Oops, it's a little quiet, so I'm gonna
Oh,
put maybe two
double it up.
doubles up.
Excellent.
Yeah, there we go.
Sorry, thank you. Is that better on Zoom? I hope it is. I'm talking about as loud as I can here. All right. So the X's in here are your site characteristics. So those are things that could be the number of lanes related to your intersection, the type of control that it is, whether or not,
We have 20, so here we go.
okay.
Let's get
got-
10 more left.
We've got 4 microphones going up here, so hopefully that helps. All right, so things like your location, rural, urban, whether or not there's medians, whether or not the intersection has lighting, or how fast the approach speeds are at your intersection. These are all different characteristics that your intersection might have, and that's what goes into helping to understand and predict your safety performance function. All right, so at the same time that the national level was developing these safety performance functions, WSDOT was looking at their roundabouts and looking to develop their own safety performance functions. So here's a little bit about the roundabouts in Wisconsin. They have, as of May of last year, 440 roundabouts within the state, 256 of them on the state highway system and 184 on local roadways. And the state maintains an inventory of all of these roundabouts, and they store all types of information in this inventory. Things like the number of entering lanes or the number of circulating lanes, how many legs the intersection has, how it accommodates trucks, when it was opened, rural, urban, and several more attributes too. And this is something that they maintain in-house and they update annually. Now, there's a simplified version that's available to the public, which is what I have a screenshot of here. And you can see all the roundabouts in the state. You know, I mentioned Green Bay earlier. You can see all the ones that are clustered around here. We have quite a few around the Dane County area and a couple popping up over here in Grant County as well. Just one right outside Platteville University here. So that's great. And you can see this. You can use the QR code on here to get to that website. And you can see the existing ones, which are the ones in green, and you can see proposed ones, which are the ones in purple. So WSDOT is constantly monitoring the crashes at their roundabouts, and they're committed to reducing their fatal and injured crashes, just like we are on a national level. So in 2013, the UW-Madison TOPS Lab completed a study of 56 sites. They collected crash data from 2005 to 2011. And with that study, they identified some sites that they thought, you know, maybe these roundabouts need a little bit of help and we should look into them further. And as this data is reviewed more, the DOT decided that it would be best to create Wisconsin-specific safety performance functions to help us predict the number of crashes at our roundabouts here in the state. So in 2018, WSDOT hired MSA and Prasad and Lyon to study more sites. We studied 88 sites, and we helped the DOT develop local safety performance functions. So here's a table of the 88 sites that were studied. And what I want to bring your attention to is, one, we had varying sites of different types: urban, rural, single lane, multi-lane. And property damage crashes for all of those sites made up 84% of the crashes at these intersections. So only 16% of the crashes here were fatal or injury crashes. So these roundabouts are doing pretty well as far as keeping the number of fatalities or severe injuries down. So the safety performance functions that were developed initially started out with 5. We had safety performance functions that were for urban roundabouts, rural roundabouts, interchanges, single lane roundabouts, and multi-lane roundabouts. And after these safety performance functions were evaluated further, some statistical analysis with that too, decided that single lane SPFs and multi-lane SPFs were what we were going to move forward with at this time. And so then we further developed individual safety performance functions for those categories, including the total number of crashes, the KABC crashes, and the PDO crashes. So you can see in the table here, the form of the model is the same as what we looked at earlier. And then up here where all those X's were in the equation before, we now have speed as a variable for the single lane roundabout. And we have whether or not the roundabout is part of an interchange as a variable for the multi-lane roundabouts. So those were the site characteristics that were identified as being most critical to our roundabouts and what is incorporated into the safety performance functions for the Wisconsin roundabouts. So now we have all these safety performance functions, and what are we going to do with them? So two things. First thing, intersection control evaluation. Intersection control evaluation, here's where you have an intersection and it has some problem. Maybe it has poor traffic operations. Maybe it has a safety issue. You've got a lot of crashes there. Maybe it's a really confusing intersection and people don't know how to drive it. Maybe you have a new development coming in and you have more traffic that's going to be coming to that intersection and you need to determine whether or not that existing intersection can still handle that additional traffic. For whatever reason, you have a problem. So now you need to figure out how you're going to solve it. And what an intersection control evaluation does is it develops a standard and transparent methodology to document your decision making. So you can't just say, oh, well, I'm going to install a roundabout here. You need to have a way for the public to understand why you made those decisions and to justify your decision. So that's where this intersection control evaluation, or ICE, comes into play. You start looking at all your viable alternatives, both for the type of traffic control and the geometry of the intersection, and document that process. And the process is usually two steps. The first one would be practical feasibility, where you brainstorm all the different types of options that you can come up with, and then whittle them down and identify which ones are most practical to bring forward. And then once you have those identified, you'd move on to step two, which is the engineering analysis. And the introduction of roundabouts as an option for a intersection is what really prompted this intersection control evaluation methodology, because roundabouts weren't real popular at the beginning, and we needed to be able to justify why we were putting them in and have a transparent method to document that. So the step one was the practical feasibility, and I mentioned you brainstorm all different types of potential improvements that you could do here. And this is a screenshot from the Wisconsin DOT. They have a brainstorming guide. You list all your different control types on the left and then look at them for whether or not they're meeting your purpose and your need. Are the right-of-way impacts associated with this alternative going to be okay? Does it meet warrants? For example, a traffic signal. You have to meet warrants in order to install a traffic signal. So you go through these high-level reviews of these options and decide which ones you're going to bring forward. If you have a at-grade intersection, you're probably not putting in an interchange. So then you can rule out all the interchange-related options and focus more on the at-grade intersections. Or if you have an at-grade intersection or a grade-separated intersection, you might not be looking at individual types of intersections. So that's how you start whittling these down. And then once you've identified what your alternatives are that you're going to move forward, you would go ahead and get down into the numbers a little bit more and do your engineering analysis. You would draw concept sketches for your alternatives. You'd start looking at the quantitative items, your operations, your costs, and your safety. And then also looking at qualitative items, things like your environmental impacts, how well they accommodate pedestrians and bicyclists, how you're going to construct it. Does it have speed control? Does it accommodate the design vehicles that you need to accommodate? Those are all the things that you look at once you whittle down to your few alternatives that you're looking at. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about cost and safety. So first, cost. I mentioned that at this point in time, you would have sketched your intersection. So now you can estimate the materials that you would have for that and what your cost might be, and whether or not you have some significant right-of-way issues or impacts, and that would be built into your cost as well. So for this particular project, we were reviewing an improvement to the existing two-way stop controlled intersection, a traffic signal, and a roundabout, and we developed construction costs for those alternatives. Then you look at the safety. And the first thing with safety is to look at the existing safety and develop a crash diagram, which is what I have on the screen here. So at this stage, developing a crash diagram really helps to identify the crash patterns at that intersection. So for this one in particular, right away, you can see that there's a lot of lines here and they're all pointing to this same crash type. So this is a problem. And you also can see these dark colored dots here. These are fatal crashes. So that's something too that we want to try to target. So when we're deciding what intersection improvements we're looking at, we want to make sure that they are targeting those crash problems that were identified here in this crash diagram. And then if you tabulate all of that into a table and you start looking at the numbers, you can really see, so at this particular intersection, right angle crashes were definitely an issue. They made up the majority of the crashes at this intersection. Right angle crashes made up all of the injury crashes here and one of the fatal crashes. So when we're looking at intersection alternatives, we better be looking at something that improves these right angle crashes. And then we can look at the safety prediction. So this is where the Wisconsin specific safety performance functions that were recently developed come into play. There's something called the Highway Safety Manual, and it has methodologies prescribed on how to do a safety analysis. And you can work through all of that by hand, or you can go to the software program, the IHSDM, which is the Interactive Highway Safety Design Model. You plug in your characteristics and you have your safety performance functions within there, and it can help you calculate what your predicted safety performance is. And then once you have all that information, you can put it together. And this is another way to help really identify what types of intersection improvements are going to benefit you the most. You can look at a benefit cost evaluation. So you've used your safety performance functions to identify the predicted number of crashes with your alternatives that you've identified. You have crash costs that are associated with all the different types of crashes, and that's what this table is here. WISTAT has identified the value for a fatal crash at about $13 million. And then as the severity of the crash decreases, the value of that crash cost decreases, and property damage only crashes right now are valued at $16,000. So if you have your predicted number of crashes, you can factor this crash cost into that predicted number of crashes and identify what your crash cost is for that intersection. And then you also have your construction cost. So you can use that to identify what your benefit cost ratio is. And generally, benefit cost ratios that are greater than 1 are considered good improvements and things to be considered further. In this particular example down here, we have a traffic signal and we have a roundabout. The benefit cost ratio for the traffic signal was 0.8, and for the roundabout was 1.5. So the roundabout has a higher benefit cost ratio, 1, because it has a lower construction cost. You can see the construction cost here. And 2, because it's really helping to reduce those really severe and fatal crashes. So when your roundabouts essentially eliminate your K and A crashes, that's a big benefit to you with the cost. All right, so now the second application for these safety performance functions is taking a look at roundabouts that are in service, that are operating today, and seeing how well they are doing in terms of safety. And we call that network screening and in-service reviews. So I mentioned earlier a 2013 study by the UW-Madison TOPS lab, and they were looking at 56 sites. And the safety performance functions were not developed at that time. So they were using before and after studies in order to identify locations that looked like they might be having some problems or underperforming. So there were 10 sites that were identified within that study as underperforming roundabouts. And then what we were able to do with the 2018 study is take the safety performance functions that were developed for Wisconsin and compare that to those 10 sites and the predicted number of crashes at each of those locations, and identify sites that had potential for safety improvement. So I'm going to walk you through potential for safety improvement. The graph that we have on the screen here would be representing the Wisconsin safety performance functions that we've developed for our roundabouts. And then we would start plotting our sites that we were looking at. So I mentioned 10 sites, an example of 3 on these graphs. AADT is on your x-axis, and number of crashes per year is on your y-axis. So for each of these sites, these existing roundabouts, we know how much traffic is going through there, and we know how many crashes that intersection has had. So we can plot that on the graph, and that's going to be your crash frequency. And then you use your safety performance function and you identify how many crashes you would predict to occur at that particular site. And then you do some statistical analysis called empirical Bayes that we won't get into, and you develop what your expected performance is. And your expected performance is always going to be in between your crash history, the red dot, and your predicted number of crashes, your orange dot. So it takes into account both the predictions for that intersection and the past history for that intersection to identify the expected performance. And then the difference between your expected performance and your predicted number of crashes is your potential for safety improvement. So an intersection that has a high potential for safety improvement or a high PSI, that means that the number of crashes that we're seeing at that intersection are a lot more than what we would have predicted and expected, and maybe there's some room for improvement there. There also could be sites that have a negative PSI. So these sites would be ones that are experiencing less crashes than what we would have expected at that particular location. And so that would indicate to us that, well, maybe we don't need to look at that site further right now. Our money is better spent on looking at something that has a positive PSI. So here are the 10 sites that were reviewed. And you'll see on here a lot of yellow highlights. All the yellow ones are negative numbers. And so as I mentioned, those negative numbers means that they're actually performing a little bit better than what we would have expected. And we compared these sites to both the national models that were available at the time. Those are the first two columns here, and the Wisconsin models that were recently developed. Looking at not only total crashes, but also fatal and injury crashes and property damage only crashes. So if you look at these two sites here, these have negative PSI for the national models and negative PSIs for the Wisconsin models. So these ones, for all the models, they're being predicted, or they're operating better than what would be expected. So these are ones we don't need to spend any time on right now. And then if you look at the Wisconsin model and just the fatal and the injury crashes, you see a lot of negative values here too. So again, these 10 sites that were identified originally based on before and after studies, once we take a closer look at it with these safety performance functions, we realize that they're actually doing, most of these are doing better than other roundabouts within the state at this point with the negative values. So there's only 4 sites here that registered as a potential for safety improvement. And even that, those numbers there are pretty low, the potential for safety improvement. So that's saying that these roundabouts are generally doing really well. But we have identified some sites that have potential for safety improvement. So now we can do what's considered an in-service review. We can look at those sites a little bit closer and identify what the problems are and how we could potentially fix it. So when reviewing all of the sites, we found some common issues. One of the issues was failure to yield, especially at multi-lane roundabouts. And that's where somebody at a multi-lane roundabout, you're sitting at the entry and you have 2 lanes coming in front of you, and a lot of people don't yield to the person on the inside lane. That's a common crash type at a multi-lane roundabout. We also had a common issue of speeds being too fast on the approach. So that leads to loss of control crashes. So somebody's coming flying down here and they can't negotiate the curves and they have a single vehicle crash off the road. So the speeds are just too fast. Drivers aren't slowing down enough for that. And another common issue was the use of super elevation on the approach curves. And that could be part of the reason why the speeds are too fast. So at this site here, I have this curve highlighted. And if you think of being on a racetrack or you watch racing on TV, and you know, they go around a circular track, and when you get to the corners are banked really steeply, and that allows the cars to go around that bank really fast. And that's what super elevation is. So if we super elevate this curve, that only encourages drivers to drive that curve faster. And we don't want drivers to drive that curve faster. As they're approaching the intersection, we want them to slow down. So that's one of the problems that we've seen at some of the intersections that have too fast approach speeds, is that curve is super elevated and we really don't want it to be. So we've identified some countermeasures that could be implemented at roundabouts that are seeing more crashes than what we would have expected. And they're in a couple different categories, speed and weather related factors and failure to yield factors. So some of the countermeasures that we could do for speed related or weather related factors would be installing a high friction surface treatment, which just helps the car stick to the pavement a little bit better. Installing rumble strips on your approaches in order to help the vehicles identify that there's an intersection coming up and they need to slow down. Restricting sight lines, which I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about here. You'll notice that that one is listed under failure to yield as well. So on this diagram in the upper right here, we have an intersection, and these lines here are your sight lines. So somebody that's approaching, really all they need to be able to see is to the left, maybe to what's happening to that upstream entry and whether or not a car is coming in and deciding whether or not it's safe to enter the intersection. You don't really need to be seeing anything through here. And you don't need to see much through the central island either. You especially don't need to be seeing anything that's happening across the circle from you. So if we're having problems with speeds, one of the things that we can do is actually restrict drivers' sight lines and put plants in the splitter islands or put more plantings within the central island to help block sight. And that might seem counterintuitive, but if you can't see, hopefully your natural reaction is to slow down. So that's the idea behind this, is that really just directing the driver's attention to where it needs to be and not being distracted by anything else and getting speeds to slow down. So that can help with reducing speeds, and it can also help with reducing failure to yield. Again, making the driver look only where they need to look and not be distracted by other things. So for failure to yield, a couple of other things that we can do is we can update signing and marking. We also might be able to reconfigure the roundabout lanes. If it's a roundabout that's been overbuilt, we just don't have the traffic there yet. Maybe it doesn't need to be a multi-lane roundabout. Maybe it can be a single lane roundabout, and we can remove one of the lanes, either temporarily or permanently. So that's all going to be dependent on your capacity, but it's certainly something that can be considered. And then for all of these countermeasures, we have identified just a relative high, medium, low associated with cost and effectiveness, so it can help analysts decide what types of countermeasures might be most effective for them to install for their problem. All right, so we're going to put this all together now, and we're going to look at a case study. This is called an in-service review. So we have an existing roundabout, and it's experiencing some crashes. This roundabout is in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. It's just outside or just next to an interchange here, and the approach speeds on Highway 53 are high, around 50 miles an hour, 55 miles an hour, something like that. And we have a fairly rural location. So here's the crash diagram that was developed for this intersection. Crashes from 2010 to 2016. And one of the things that might stand out to you right away is that there's a lot of little squigglies on here. And all these little squiggly lines are single vehicle loss of control crashes. And in particular, there's a lot of lines over here, all pointing to this area. This is the southbound approach. This is where the interchange was over here, and then the roundabout comes in this way. So there's a lot of crashes that look like they're related to loss of control with the southbound approach. So if we take this and we tabulate it, then we can get an even better idea of what's going on here. So loss of control crashes, all those squiggly lines make up for 83% of the total crashes at the intersection. So there's certainly something going on here that we should try to fix. If you take a look at the number of crashes per year for this intersection based on this crash history, it's 5.7. If you were to run that safety performance function, you would expect 2.3 crashes at this intersection. So again, another way to understand that something's going on here and we should try to solve it. And then also a little side note, that southbound direction that we were looking at, loss of control crashes made up 61% of the total intersection crashes. So now we have an idea of what we're trying to look for and try to figure out what's causing that. And the issues that were identified here was that the southbound approach speeds were too fast. I rotated this on you, north is over here. So this is your southbound approach. And that there was too much sight at the entry. So countermeasures that were identified to help counteract those crashes were, one, to mound the central island. So you can see in this picture down here, the central island is mounded. So that does two things. That helps increase the visibility of the intersection as you're approaching it, and it helps screen visibility across the intersection. So you don't need to see across, you just look to your left. So that has a twofold benefit there. And Wisconsin, when they install their roundabouts, it's prescribed that you mount the central island like this. So all new roundabouts that are installed should have mounted central islands or landscaping in there to help screen that and increase the visibility of the intersection. Then the other countermeasure that was identified was installing rumble strips on the approaches. You can see we had 3 sets of rumble strips in here, another picture of it down here. And so most of you have probably driven through an intersection that had rumble strips approaching it. You know that that forces you to slow down. And then signing changes were also identified as a countermeasure. So we have this sign here that's the yield ahead sign that indicates to drivers that there's an intersection coming up and you're going to need to slow down. The sign was moved farther upstream so that drivers would see it sooner and hopefully identify that they needed to slow down and realize that there was something coming up. And then some signing changes were made to the lane signs as well to just reinforce what lane drivers needed to be in order to get to where they were trying to go. So now we can take a look at the after crash history from 2017 to 2021. After these countermeasures were installed, we had a 63% reduction in the total number of crashes at that intersection and a 71% reduction in the southbound loss of control crashes. So significant benefits here by making those relatively minor, low-cost improvements to the intersection. And then you can also take a look at the crashes per year. So now for this 5-year period, we're at 2.1 crashes per year. And again, that expected was 2.3. So right now that intersection for that time period anyways is operating a little bit better than expected. So certainly a success on that. All right, so just to summarize some of the things that we talked about here, reducing fatal and injury crashes at an intersection is a national goal. And it's a goal of all the states really, and Wisconsin too. And modern roundabouts are a great method to reduce driver speeds. And with the development of roundabout safety performance functions, we have an even more sophisticated model for helping us to predict the number of crashes at an intersection in the future. And Wisconsin is really a leader in the installation and safety analysis of roundabouts. They've done a lot of research. They've developed their own capacity and models and safety performance functions. And this has really allowed us to advance the future of roundabouts in the state and provide a better understanding of the performance of in-service roundabouts and roundabouts that we install moving forward. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. It's been a pleasure, and we can open it up for any questions.
Questions.
Yeah.
So regarding this case study, was that roundabout constructed before the countermeasure of mounding was established? Or why wasn't it implemented from the
That's a good
start?
question. I can't tell you why it wasn't implemented to begin with. It's possible that that was not a standard at the time.
Okay.
But it's best practice and it's what we should be doing moving forward for sure. Yep.
Questions.
I guess, do you ever think there's a possibility where the intersection's too large for the roundabout, for any size roundabout, or how big can these roundabouts get, I guess?
We have had roundabouts. Yeah, we've had roundabouts with 3-lane entries and also bypass lanes. So like the picture on here, this is a bypass lane. So it's for right turning traffic. So we've had roundabouts that have had 3-lane entries and bypass lanes as well. So that's about as big as what I've seen. We do not have any turbo roundabouts designs. I know there are a few being developed across the country. Georgia is working on implementing some turbo roundabout designs. And I believe there's some potentially, I might be wrong on this, but I think Washington might have a couple too that they're working on. So they're slowly trickling in, and we're gathering information from the Netherlands, which is where a lot of that came from, and figuring out how to implement it for our climates and our drivers. So we personally have not done any yet, but it's something that we're certainly monitoring.
I have a question about, I feel annoyed driving continuous roundabouts. Like you have 4 in a row. It's really, 1 is fine, but the 4, like,
It makes you go slow though, doesn't it?
True.
Yes. So, you know, a lot of times we have signalized intersections in a row, and if you hit the green, that's great. But these intersections, a lot of times in a corridor, are closely spaced. And so throwing a different type of control in the middle of a roundabout. You know, it doesn't always play nicely. So having a roundabout next to a traffic signal doesn't always work if you have too much queuing at the traffic signal that might go into the roundabout. So that's one of the reasons why we have corridors or roundabouts to help with just containing a uniform type of traffic control along that corridor. Also, access control is an excellent way for roundabout corridors to work too. So if you have a lot of driveways on your corridor and you can put a median in there, and putting that median in restricts a lot of your conflict points, and then you can use the roundabouts to make U-turns. So that's another benefit of roundabouts and corridors.
I have a bold question. Do you foresee in 20 years, roundabout is gonna take over all, not all, but most of them, the traffic signals? Because roundabout is so good.
No, probably not all traffic signals. There are still instances where there's just too much traffic for a roundabout. I mean, these are big intersections, but when you get a lot of turning traffic, sometimes those traffic signals work better than what a roundabout would. So no, I don't think that all traffic signals are going to be replaced with roundabouts, especially at those high capacity types of intersections. But we'll see what happens with, you know, like automated driving and things like that too. Who knows where that future will take us, and how those driverless cars might work with roundabouts versus traffic signals too.
Anyone else? Do we have any questions from maybe the chat? Oh, we have a couple. What's the time? 6:01. Let's do two of them. Here.
So here's a question. Do people run through the middle of them at night? Not often, but we have seen that happen before. There's videos out there on YouTube of cars launching through the middle of the roundabout. Right?
Especially you have a mount. Think about that. Now we have a mount there, right?
Yes. So we do see that occasionally. A lot of times there's they're under the influence of something when they're doing that, and you can't fix stupid. So yes, we have seen that. You can find some YouTube videos, but it's not a real common thing.
How about an improvement with flashing lights then? Right
Yeah.
now, all those signs are depends on your front light, right?
Mhm.
Can we make the lights like proactive rather than reactive?
Yeah, I mean, you could put lights on like some of the signings as
Yep,
you
yep.
approach.
So it's
Yeah.
flashing.
Yep, you could certainly do that if you have a location where people are just not realizing that there's an intersection there.
Yeah, let's do one more.
So data related to pedestrian and bicycle crashes at roundabouts. I don't have data available with me right now, but what I can say is that there's a lot of discussion about peds and bike accommodations at roundabouts right now. And it can be difficult to look at everything all at once, but it's still a little bit easier than a traffic signal because you can just focus on the crosswalk that's in front of you and focus on the crosswalk that's downstream of you once you're making your turning movement, instead of trying to see what's happening at other locations, you know, farther away from you at the intersection. There's a lot of discussion right now too about how to best accommodate pedestrians at multi-lane roundabouts and whether or not we need to install RRFBs at the crosswalks or even pedestrian hybrid beacons or hawk signals. So there are studies happening right now as far as the best ways to accommodate pedestrians and bicyclists. I think one of the good things is that the roundabout slows traffic, and the slower your speed, if there is a crash, the less severe that crash is going to be. I mean, there's stats out there about if you're going 15 miles an hour and you have a crash with a pedestrian or a bicyclist versus if you're going even 30 miles an hour, and what that fatality percentage is. And I don't know the numbers, but you know, it's a lot less severe and a lot less likely for having a fatality at those lower speeds.
All right, so it's 6:05, I think, 6:03. We'll do that. We're gonna do this. First of all, well, thank you for the speaker again. Thank you very much. And then also thank you for your time to attend, and then also on Zoom. I'm gonna officially close it. So you know, I understand that you may have other duties to do, so I'm gonna stop recording here.